TYT's got a new audio network, guys, and you're gonna love it. We got our existing shows, but on top of that, we've got a whole new slate of shows coming out that are in podcast form, including the Jimmy Dore Show. So now nobody does comedy like Jimmy. He is super aggressive and sometimes harsh and often irreverent, but he's gonna give it to you like he sees it. There's no question about that. So you're gonna love this podcast. He's gonna have some of the top comedians and comedy writers on there. So if you wanna check that out along with the entire audio network, go to tyt.com/audio.
I don't know exactly what Trump supporters are wanting out of Trump right now, but I do know what they're getting, and what they're getting is false equivalence between completely innocent undocumented immigrants, especially children, and criminals like in MS-13, because that has been, outside of that one tweet in the morning, the rest of the day, that's what he's been talking about. Here he is once again appearing on stage with the families of victims killed by immigrants. I presume 9-year-old undocumented immigrants, since he's doing it right now. But that is what his messaging is, so here is a bit of his speech.
These are the American citizens permanently separated from their loved ones. The word permanently being the word that you have to think about, permanently. They're not separated for a day or 2 days. They are permanently separated because they were killed by criminal illegal aliens. These are the families the media ignores. No major networks send cameras to their homes or display the images of their incredible loved ones across the nightly news. They don't do that. They don't talk about the death and destruction caused by people that shouldn't be here, people that will continuously get into trouble and do bad things.
So every one of those cases is obviously a tragedy, and I'm sure that every one of those families appreciates having a politician who at least appears to have their back, even though he is transparently using them as props to distract people from the horrific policy that he's been forced to backtrack on. Those kids that were being separated had not recently murdered Americans. Their family members had not murdered Americans. And we know, I'll say it again, doesn't matter, it will never sink into the heads of people who want to hate these immigrants. Immigrants in America, both undocumented and documented, commit crimes at lower rates than native-born Americans. I'm talking about burglary, I'm talking about murder, I'm talking about rape, I'm talking about all sorts of crimes like that. They're far more law-abiding for fairly obvious reasons, particularly if they're undocumented, because of the obvious consequences of committing crimes and it being found out. But it doesn't matter. He wants you to think immigrant murderer, immigrant rapist. And so that's why he continually has been tweeting in all caps today about people being murdered by immigrants. He talks about MS-13. And then Steve King, who might literally be the most high-profile white supremacist in the country right now, he tweeted this. He sees a picture of some of these kids, and he says, oh yeah, they're young boys, all old enough to be tried as adults. They're not being tried for anything, by the way. But he immediately goes to some sort of criminal liability. They can serve in the military. They're also prime MS-13 gang material, and certainly grew up in the culture of one of the top 10 most violent countries in the world. Although to be fair, it could just be some sort of reflex, because when I look back at photos growing up of me and my friends, sometimes I'll say they're prime school shooters. Right. You know, they're prime rapists. They're prime, all of these things that white males in this country are far more likely to do than illegal immigrants. If you see it, you just have to say the crimes that they're likely to commit. That's what Steve King will say.
Right, and I'm really glad you bring up the fact of facts, because there was a study that was just discussed today from the Cato Institute, and the Cato Institute is not known as a progressive institute, it's a libertarian institute, but they basically were looking at the last couple decades of immigration and sort of isolating areas of extreme immigration and where immigration had increased the population in those areas and so forth, and they found that in those areas there had been a reduction in burglaries of 42%, a reduction in murders of 47%. There's actually been facts and real numbers and real statistics to back up what's the real situation, as opposed to just throwing out the idea that somehow because someone's coming from somewhere else, they are MS-13 or enlisting for.
Really fast, just because the news moves so fast that we forget about so much. But Steve King is the guy who last week retweeted a neo-Nazi with a long history. Everybody knows who he is. There's absolutely no reason that he would be seeing this man's tweets unless he knew who he was. And nothing happened. Absolutely nothing. No censure. Republican Party didn't want to say anything about it. None of his colleagues wanted to say anything about it. And weirdly, now he's going on and he's attacking these immigrant children.
Yeah, so when I see him saying that these are prime material for gangs like MS-13, what does that mean? So they're not part of MS-13 and they're kids. So when you look at a Latino kid, you think, because you just said it, I didn't say it, you said it in your tweet, oh, that Latino kid looks like someone who's gonna be in a gang one day. So that admission of racism is startling. And I'm kind of blown away that he's a United States congressman. If you don't know, I mean, it's not like he's a local country bumpkin that got elected to some board, but it was a mistake and they're gonna get him out next time, and he's been reelected. Even though his white supremacy is clear, he said earlier that white people need to make more babies because we don't, to protect culture, their culture. So his list of white supremacist sayings are through the roof. It reminded me of Dick Cheney when he wanted to obfuscate about Iraq. He was asked, well, did Iraq attack us on 9/11? Now, the correct answer is they did not. He said, well, the attackers of 9/11 came from the same area of the world as Iraq, leaving out the fact that the area of the world that he's referring to is, yes, the Middle East in general, but specifically Saudi Arabia, 15 out of the 19 hijackers, which is one of our top allies. So we didn't want to attack Saudi Arabia, even though that's where the attackers came from. So instead we attack Iraq, and Cheney's logic was, they kind of look similar, don't they? So why don't we just attack the wrong country? So that's what you get out of racism. And in Cheney's case, he was doing it for a political purpose, right? Steve King, yes, the demagoguery is a political purpose, but I think that he also means it. That he really is an actual racist.
And if I can, I mean, even on this campaign, like with my opponents, I was profiled, right? I'm Latino, Arab American. I get it. I get it. My existence is the resistance, is what some people say. But the truth is, we try to make sure that Trump doesn't overgeneralize my community, our communities, or any community. But we also have to make sure not to overgeneralize his supporters. We can't conflate Trump with his supporters. And I think they're just picking sides and they're tolerating a lot of this BS from Trump. But if you drill down and you talk to them, for example, I tell them, look, you know who the biggest victims of undocumented immigrant crime are? Other undocumented immigrants, but they can't report it because they'll be deported. And if you gave them status, they would report those bad actors quicker than ICE could get them. And if you care about that issue, then the best thing to do is to give status to every undocumented person who doesn't have a criminal background and give them a legal pathway towards citizenship. They will report those bad actors quicker than anybody else because they came here to flee that.
So Ammar, you and I have a shade of difference on that, and it is a shade, it's not completely different. So I do oftentimes criticize Republican voters, Trump supporters, et cetera, because this is the guy that you put into office and then you see what he's doing and you're still with him. So, okay, then there's some degree of culpability. But I think that a lot of the Steve King supporters might see that tweet, and until you break down the stereotypes built into the tweet, they might go, yeah, I mean, those guys could be MS-13 one day. Right. And when they hear Trump speak, they think, well, I mean, that's true. They're not, in the news, they're not talking about all the crime in these poor families. But when you go, wait a minute, does local news report crime like that all the time? Oh yeah, it does, doesn't it, right? Wait, why did he say the Latino kids look like they might be MS-13, but not about the other kids? Well, I mean, okay, and did those kids actually do anything to deserve that designation? Would it be fair if we did that to your kids? So let's say that there's whatever it might be, like in Mississippi, the majority of gangs are white gangs, for example. So if you're in a part of Mississippi that has a biker gang, is it okay to assume that your kid's gonna be a biker criminal that does murder and rape? That's not fair, right? And you break it down like that, and I hope a lot of King's voters will then go, well, yeah, no, you're right. That's not the right way to look at it. But I think that the shade of difference is that in the beginning they look at that and go, yeah, Steve King's right, Trump is right. And that is troubling.
Yeah, I see that, and also that's also true for Hunter supporters. They have these views, but they're not rock ribbed. If you could drill down and point out the kind of inconsistencies, they're like, yeah, you're right. So I think there's hope there, but I think without us doing our job of communicating to people about the nuances and how we could, make our country safer, it's not by demonizing everybody, but it sometimes requires to embolden some people. You know, the anti-venom comes from the venom itself. So sometimes emboldening these communities might be the best antidote to addressing the concerns that come from them.
Yeah, and so last thing is what John mentioned at the beginning, the percentage of crime. So the undocumented immigrants commit less crime. It's a fact. It's documented in all the studies. I can give you a nonsense anecdote on top just because it's fun. In California, a lot of times joke around that if you see someone driving really, really carefully, it's probably somebody who's undocumented.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay, and so, but you don't need that anecdote. The numbers bear it out. So when Trump and the others emphasize the crime committed by the people who commit less crime on average, that gives you a sense that it's not the crime they're worried about, it's who did it, and they have a different purpose. And the purpose is to demonize those people that they have selected.
And
yes.
And really fast. There are some fairly high profile cases, if you're a fan of reading history, of governments talking over, unnecessarily focusing on the crime of a particular community to turn a country against that community, and it didn't end well.
2 easy ways to follow the Young Turks. One is hit the subscribe button down below, then you're a TYT subscriber. And second is ring the bell. And when you do that on YouTube, you're notified of our videos.